Russia's frozen north is St. Petersburg, and on the banks of the Neva River stands the State Hermitage Museum. Its story is a microcosm of Russian history. The Hermitage has witnessed dramatic events, war and revolution, but the art has survived to tell the tale. For many years I've been fascinated by the Hermitage and what makes it unique. Finally, as a filmmaker, I was given unprecedented access to tell its story. Through the imperial splendour, everywhere you're reminded that it's a palace.
The spirit itself and taste is also a monument. You can feel it in every gallery, and we are lucky to have interiors and to keep the spirit of palace.
You could imagine how the emperors and the empresses were living in these places and dancing and doing a lot of other things.
Behind the scenes today, instead of czars, there are museum curators, preserving the art for future generations. I'll be meeting them and hearing their stories.
I think the Hermitage has so much more resonance in the heart of a Russian man or woman. It's more than a museum, it's really part of the soul of the nation.
I'll be opening doors previously closed to the public, looking at the history of the building and what makes it tick. In the throne room of the Winter Palace, the court of St. Petersburg gathered to celebrate the anniversary of the museum. The Hermitage is one of the largest museums in the world, a city within a city, an estate within a state. It's a labyrinth of 2,000 rooms housing over 3 million objects. Founded in 1764 by Catherine the Great, who came to the throne dramatically in a coup d'etat, taking the title Empress of all the Russias.
You know, she told about herself that I'd rather had the man's spirit, not woman's. But I don't look mannish because together with the mind and character of the man, I have an appeal of a pleasant woman. And that's what we see on her portraits.
This is a wonderful and very famous portrait of Catherine the Great. It's Catherine the Great in military robe and one of the regiments of the Guards on her horse called Diamond. And this painting was not in good condition. So now when they begin to restore it, they can now prove that it is done by the painter himself. So now we have the first portrait of Catherine of this style. Here comes another problem, it's my problem. Now where to show it? You see, it's a very big portrait.
In the costume store, away from public view, I find more evidence of Catherine's personality, miraculously conserved for 250 years.
She was very strong and powerful. It's the first impression of her costumes.
Throughout her 34-year reign, Catherine looked towards Europe and used her incredible wealth and power to civilize a previously barbaric Russia.
It's our outstanding costume of the Catherine the Great uniform dress. It's dated nearly 1767.
The Hermitage owes most of its greatest pieces to Catherine, whose passion was collecting.
Ambitions knew no ends. Russia has to come to the level of European countries. not only army, not only navy, culturally, everything should be on that level, and also collections. Then it should be endless and absolutely impressive. She acquired 3 major collections en bloc, really. 1760s, she was able to buy the collection of Count Brühl in Dresden.
This painting, which is Titian's first masterpiece, was acquired by Empress Catherine the Great. This painting was described by Giorgio Vasari as one of Titian's first works in Venice.
And the acquisition of collection of Crozat in 1771 was certainly one of the major things for the collection, because it included also first Raphael that came to Russia. It was on itself something like 400 paintings.
She also picked up one of Rembrandt's greatest works.
And then 1779, and it was very political also decision that she was buying a collection of Robert Walpole. He was Prime Minister for England. She was trying just to show Europe that Russian money is unlimited, absolutely unlimited. And Walpole collection, it is 200 paintings nearly, 198, and of the first quality.
It was not just a whim of a capricious woman, it was always a serious matter for her. For instance, she bought the Walpole collection, then Russia was in 2 wars, one with Swedes on the north and one with Turks on the south. Even at such a serious and difficult moment for the country, she was able to spend money for buying pictures. So she understood very, very well how it worked for her image.
You can just imagine that these ships arriving here opposite to the palace and then unloading them, and all these crates coming to this corridor and simply filling the walls.
Catherine's legacy to this day inspires creativity. It's a living museum, a place of scholarship. I found artists working everywhere, learning from the great masters. One of her most surprising acquisitions was a sculpture, discovered completely by chance.
Catherine II made very, very important acquisition. She bought the collection of Marquis Light Brown in 1787.
This job lot of 250 classical sculptures from England was discovered completely by chance on arrival in Russia to contain a rare masterpiece, this unfinished marble by Michelangelo. Professor Mikhail Piotrovsky, director of the Hermitage, followed dynastically in his father's footsteps.
The first place I came, it was Hermitage when I began to walk. We lived nearby and my father worked in Hermitage all his life, so I was brought here. When I was growing up, as I was told, I should remember that the first place I was brought was the arsenal. So I was shown some drums and swords. Certainly I did never touch the swords, forbidden. So I have this experience from my childhood, the museum experience and the experience of archaeology and studying ancient history. I have studied the profession from the beginning. I was watching how my father was doing it. He was a great person, and certainly he was a great director. In the middle of the 19th century, these rooms have been rooms of the, let's say, the government, because the State Council of Russia was situated here, and the place which is my office, the room which is my office, was the Cabinet of Ministers of Russian Empire. Then they all moved to another bigger buildings, but we still feel that we are part of the governing body of Russian Empire.
The Hermitage was long ruled by imperial tsars. Now the directors are state appointed. I was taken to the real inner sanctum of the Hermitage. The desk in Petrovsky's office belonged to Tsar Alexander III, but has since disappeared under piles of papers. Petrovsky speaks 9 languages.
I must know how to do all the things which are done by other different kind of people in Hermitage. So I'm a coordinator, and the final, place and person for arbitration. Final decision is mine. So it's very totalitarian, but that's how it was always and should be.
I was led to a room in a far hidden corner of the museum, away from the public eye. I was told we'd find out all about Catherine the Great's private obsession, collecting engraved gemstones and cameos.
Добрый день. Здравствуйте. Прошу прощения за беспокойство.
Очень приятно вас видеть.
Хочется очень показать.
All preserved in their original 18th century Röntgen cabinets.
Хранилось, как хранится теперь. Wow.
Думаю, что почти без изменений.
What we see now, we have can see how Catherine the Great was keeping her collections, and definitely these are wonderful. Well, it's not showcases, but wonderful pieces of art. We tried to keep as it was in Catherine time, because she also had it in storage. There's a way how you keep them. So I'll show you how it is.
This is unbelievable. And these cabinets were specially built, I understand.
These cabinets have been specially built for Catherine.
And this tells you a bit about her, doesn't it? The kind of quantity.
Yes, quantity and quality, because this is a very important part of Hermitage and Catherine the Great's acquisitions. It was always quality, which was very high. The collection are the best names, but also the best things from the best names. In a way, I think the passion which she had for art is a passion which everybody must have when it works in the museum. It's a great delight to work with all the things, to work in such surroundings. That's why sometimes government thinks that they don't need to pay us money, because we're enjoying our life being here.
Sometimes I think that her job and your job are very similar.
Well, partly. I'm not running the country, not making wars.
Although the Hermitage was created by Catherine the Great, it was her predecessor, Peter the Great, who also collected widely. One of the quirkiest items I found in the Hermitage is a waxwork of Peter, who was nearly 7 feet tall, and actually a great hero who founded St. Petersburg. A small throne room was built in his memory, which was under restoration. He'd acquired from tomb robbers ancient Scythian gold dating back to the 7th century BC, which had been brought to southern Russia by nomadic tribes from Central Asia. Siberia yielded yet more treasures.
We will see the costume of Peter the Great. He was very talented, and I'm proud of this fact that he chose the French fashion for Russia. This uniform became the museum exhibit in 1732. He collected a lot of items, sculptures. It was very new for Russia, and his choice was really incredible.
I discovered that one of these very special exhibits was acquired through a swap.
The most famous sculpture of the Hermitage came under the reign of Peter the Great. You can see it in this gallery, and it came in 1719. It was given to Peter the Great by Pope Clement XI as exchange for relics of Saint Brigitta. Imagine, it was covered by light colors, rouge lips, black blue eyes, gilded hair, and her charm and her power was very impressive even in antiquities, and a lot of ancient writers left us the description of this statue.
They say that a certain man was once overcome with love for the statue, and that after he'd hidden himself in the shrine during the night time, he embraced the statue, and that it thus bears a stain, an indication of his lust.
The swap turned out to be one-sided. In the end, the Pope never got his relics. One legacy built on another. Every ruler who was on the throne, found here in the Romanov corridor, added something to the Hermitage, accumulating more and more treasures for the ever-growing collection. In the early 1800s, Catherine the Great's grandson, Alexander I, defeated Napoleon. A portrait of all the generals who fought appears in the 1812 gallery. He was also a collector.
First acquisition was certainly for sculpture from the collection of Josephine Beauharnais, the wife of the Napoleon. And the works of Canova are something sentimental.
Alexander also acquired great paintings from Paris. Alexander's brother, Nicholas I, was to make a huge impact on the architecture of the Hermitage by building a victory chariot and a column in memory of Russia's triumph over Napoleon. He also added a museum wing to the Winter Palace.
This gallery was a part of the new Hermitage, the first public museum constructed by Nikolai I.
The new Hermitage building, which is impressive one and I think quite unique in the world, and every visitor, believe me, say wow, entering this interior.
The space is wonderful. It's a great example how the masterpiece of museum architecture has been done. This is new Hermitage building by Leo von Klenze, which still is considered to be one of the best museum buildings in the world, and it is. It's part of what Hermitage is. We are keeping the memory of Russia and Russian Empire and Russian history, not only by objects, but trying to, with the buildings and trying to remind people what our history is.
But in 1837, all the treasures were nearly lost forever in a big fire which burned for several days, gutting the Winter Palace. The art was saved by the guards and dumped in the snow. Some gold ornaments were only found when the snow melted in the spring. Within a year and a half, the palace was completely rebuilt by Nicholas I, and the art reinstalled.
In 1852, it was opened for public as the first public museum in Russia.
One of the most popular exhibits today is the Madonna Lita by Leonardo da Vinci.
Now, when you come to the Hermitage, you see that there are crowds around Leonardo, endless crowds. People that, when they come to the Hermitage, they all need to see Da Vinci. Second painting, Madonna Benoit, it was one of the greatest lucks of the Hermitage, that it was discovered in St. Petersburg, in the private family of Benoit. And then it was decided to buy it for the Hermitage. Nicholas II, who had no artistic interests, in this case, he gave the money, because for that time it was the highest price for the painting. Highest price lasted until 1960s.
In the early 20th century, the Hermitage played centre stage to the biggest upheaval in Russian history, an era of massive social change. There was huge dissent against the Tsarist autocracy, who ruled from the Winter Palace. With the onset of the First World War, St. Petersburg was renamed Petrograd. Parts of the Winter Palace changed their function and became a hospital, and later an orphanage. By 1917, the museum's treasured collection was in jeopardy and was packed up into crates for shipping to safety in Moscow, out of reach of the advancing German army.
When foreigners are in the Baltic, we have to evacuate collections. It was in 1917. There were also 3 trains. 2 managed to go out of Petrograd, went to Moscow, and the 3rd stopped because the October Revolution happened and there was no way to get to Moscow or objects came back.
It wasn't just the Germans that Tsar Nicholas II had to worry about. Lenin's revolutionary Bolsheviks were uprising against him.
The revolution had a great impact on the Hermitage and, of course, the Winter Palace as well, which was residency of the Tsar's family, even though it wasn't as dramatic as an Eisenstein film.
Revolution is like a fire. And so when the situation became difficult, the director of Hermitage just closed the doors to the Winter Palace. So when the Winter Palace was stormed, the Hermitage saved itself. They didn't let anybody to get into the museum. And at a certain moment, they opened other doors to the members of Revolutionary Guard who came just to protect the collection.
The clock in the White Dining Room stopped at 2:10, the exact moment the Bolsheviks broke in and arrested the provisional government, who were meeting around this table.
Only 5 days after the October Revolution, Minister of Public Enlightenment issued a decree ensuring that both Winter Palace and the State Hermitage became the museums.
Nicholas II and his entire family were executed in Ekaterinburg, marking the end of the Romanov dynasty. Their portraits were slashed. Petrograd was then renamed Leningrad, and the capital of Russia was moved to Moscow. Incredibly, all the remaining contents of the palace and museum came back to the Hermitage intact, now seen as property of the people.
There are 2 ways you can do something against the previous regime. Or you just destroy things, which mostly is done, or you show things and say, well, look how bad it is. Look how terrible it was to use money of the people to bring this. And so this second style is much better.
The effect of the revolution meant the entire palace was nationalized. Every corner of the building became part of the Soviet State Museum, even the most unusual and private of places.
We are in the porcelain storage, which used to be the former bathroom of 2 Russian empresses. And you can see here a lot of evidence of how the bathroom looked like at her time. One of these rooms were chosen to be the storage of the Russian imperial porcelain. Within a few months after the porcelain factory turned into the state porcelain factory, they got a request from the government that the Soviet porcelain should become a part of the Lenin's plan of the monumental propaganda. The new ideology, the new political and economical issues of the newly born country.
After the revolution, traditional artists didn't immediately accept the new Bolshevik power, and it was left or avant-garde artists who offered their services to the new state. Kazimir Malevich was the father of suprematism. In 1915, he exhibited his famous Black Square. After the revolution, Kazimir Malevich also felt that he could produce art of the new Russia. So they were hoping to impose the new art and new artistic forms into the porcelain production. But still, Malevich wanted it to be unique rather than something that every worker will have in their house.
This movement was to inspire another Russian artist, Kandinsky, to produce some of his greatest paintings. The new communist ideology stated that all property must be shared. Many wealthy individuals were forced to flee the country in fear of their lives and leave behind their immense private collections of European art. This was a period when the museum acquired some of its most famous and valuable works. One such collection came from the home of wealthy Moscow merchant Sergei Shukin.
Of course, he couldn't take with him something, not only money, letters, documents, nothing. His collection was nationalized. Van Gogh, Cézanne, and then Matisse. And Picasso was the latest comer. But in the 30s, this art, modern art, was not greeted in the country.
The museum was now run by directors under government control. This newly acquired Western art was branded as decadent, banned and not to be shown. It's incredible to think that Picasso and Matisse were mothballed. Instead, the Hermitage focused on its own ancient Russian history, a period before the European-loving Tsars.
So the time archaeology became the main source of objects and the main trend of scientific research in Hermitage. So it's also history of Hermitage. And we have here several rooms which are dedicated to results of work of Russian archaeologists.
The world's oldest carpet was discovered in Siberia by Hermitage curators. It was preserved in ice in the frozen tombs of Pazyryk, dating back to 500 BC. Here lies a tattooed Scythian warrior. This really is Russia's own history. Objects were reclassified according to their communist value. In the mid-20s under Stalin's reign, the Hermitage suffered catastrophic losses to its collection of European art. To raise money for tractors and machine tools, Russia sold off many of Catherine's precious old masters to America, bought by wealthy financier Andrew Mellon, who founded the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C.
There were more works offered than the 21 he acquired. They were great old masters that the Russian government decided to sell to raise cash at the time.
You know, in 1911, there was a guidebook published by Alexander Benoit, a Russian historian of art. And sometimes it seems to me when I just turn the pages of this guidebook and see the reproductions there, the images. They just took this book into their hands, and just put the finger, I want this, with this and this, because you can see that all these masterpieces, a lot of them are reproduced in this book.
Well, the collection also houses probably some of the greatest Italian Renaissance masters in the entire world. The Raphael Alba Madonna, the great Tondo, is an extraordinary painting.
It's really pretty exciting to go through this museum and say, oh wow, that's a fabulous painting. It turns out, oh, that was Andrew Mellon. Oh my gosh, it came from the Hermitage.
Well, it was an extraordinary coup, but no question about it. I think he paid something north of $6,600,000 at the time for them. Can't imagine. It was quite an extraordinary thing historically. Still is, for that matter.
It was a national tragedy because defense was difficult because, well, politically, no real possibility of saying no was existing in the 30s.
A letter was sent to Stalin by future museum director Joseph Orbeli, begging him to halt the sell-off. But the purge didn't stop at art. The Hermitage staff were now under threat. Seen as enemies of the state, they were prosecuted under trumped-up charges. Over 50 were exiled to the Gulag prison camps.
Many people from the Hermitage spent their time in Gulag. People were sent because of their being the member of the noble family, being the son or the daughter of the officer of Tsar army.
My grandfather, Nikolai Bauer, had worked in the Hermitage more than 25 years, and he was arrested and in September executed.
During the Reign of Terror, at least 12 curators never returned. To this day, people don't want to talk about the purge.
And do you know why they were sent away?
I don't know why they were sent away, don't know.
My father was in prison for a short time, half a year. But it was beginning, and thank God, then he was freed, and he, I think, was using that decision that hasn't done anything wrong in the next years which came.
Vor uns liegt Deutschland, in uns marschiert Deutschland und hinter uns kommt Deutschland.
Так вот, Гитлер объявлял, это ж я сама слышала, Гитлера слова, что поскольку вы не пускаете, не даете взять город, то город все равно возьмем и сравняем его с землей.
In World War II, Hitler had the Hermitage in his sights. The Nazis weren't just killing people, they were looting the art, systematically plundering across Europe for the Führer's own museum.
There was a question of being robbed and everything taken out. So when Germans began to come in close to St. Petersburg, Hermitage was prepared for evacuation. But it was Orbeli's decision. They began to prepare collections for evacuating to Urals. 3 trains have been prepared. 2 managed to leave Leningrad. The third has to go back because the siege was closed. The same thing happened in 1917.
They were put into crates and evacuated to Ural Mountains as all other things. So just frames were in the walls.
With most of the collection safe, the curators and their families sheltered in the cellars underneath the Winter Palace.
The Germans bombed all the food stores, and it was extraordinary. Kind of the smell of burning sugar was absolutely hanging over Leningrad. You smell it everywhere and so on. No food anymore, kind of bombs started coming the whole time. And then the Germans surrounded.
Didn't your father come here as a fire warden?
Yes, definitely. Well, my father was the fire warden. They have been mostly at nights, so they have been going through these rooms at night during the war. And we have a picture, one of the pictures which is so dark. It's exactly of this room during the night, at night during the war.
Everything was concentrated on what to eat next. And all kind of things appeared, you know. First of all, belts, which my father kind of had a lot at home. So these belts were slowly cooked till they were quite soft, and they were quite delicious. Then my grandmother, first of all, she had a cat. Then my mother said, well, you must decide who is more precious to you, your cat or your granddaughter. So she cried and gave us her cat. Cats are delicious, absolutely delicious.
Soldiers who came from the front, who were hungry, who were tired of battles and all these things. One of the guides made an excursion around the Hermitage, and he showed just empty frames, but talked about the paintings. He described them, and people were standing and listening, and everybody were happy to listen, even then they couldn't see the paintings.
A third of the population of Leningrad died in the siege, including over 100 of the Hermitage staff.
The first exhibition was opened at once, shortly after the victory, and after, step by step, galleries have been opened and these sculptures occupy their places.
During the war, the idea of compensation and restitution arose in all the countries fighting Germany, but certainly especially in Russia, because a lot of Russian heritage was stolen, was taken by Germans. Then there was a decision that when we win and come to Germany, first of all we'll take our collections back, and then we'll take some of them as compensation for what is done to our countries. So we do have some of the paintings and some archaeological material.
Piotrovsky took me to the museum's storage facility centre on the other side of St. Petersburg, where I discovered these frescoes, liberated from Germany and kept by Russia since the 40s.
Коллекция происходит из Берлинского музея Indische Kunst, который в результате военных действий Великой Отечественной войны был почти полностью разрушен, и руками советских солдат большая часть этой коллекции была спасена из пожарища, погружена в поезда и вывезена с территории Берлина в Москву.
For years, the hidden treasures seized from Germany were kept in closed storage. Because they wanted them returned, it was too controversial to exhibit them. However, the Russian parliament decreed a law saying that all art should stay where it was.
In 1995, there was a permission to show those paintings. That's how they're here.
My opinion is that whatever was taken during the war or whatever it is, it's all right, but it should be shown to the public. It shouldn't be kept hidden away for years and years and years. That's my opinion, but that's just my opinion, you know.
The sin is not to show art. You have to show art. If you have something, you must show it and then discuss to whom it does belong. It's maybe still our socialist upbringing and education. It's important. Art is more important than property and money. I'm afraid not everybody thinks this way. But still, it's what we try to teach in the Hermitage.
The death of Stalin in 1953 saw in a new era for the Hermitage. The extraordinary collection of post-impressionist paintings seized from Shukin and other exiles, which had been kept locked away, could at last be shown.
The people around Stalin and Stalin himself, they hated such art. Only from '56 we started here to show Impressionists, then Van Gogh again, Matisse, Picasso, and now every important painting of such artists is on view.
The government brought many foreign dignitaries to the Hermitage, but the then director, Mikhail Artemonov, found himself fighting a constant battle to keep hold of the museum's treasures.
Government always wanted the Hermitage give up some of its things so that it could be used as the gifts to foreign delegations or things like that. And he refused to do it.
The director of Hermitage was sacked. Many directors of Hermitage have been sacked because Hermitage is a very special institution. It's very important. And of the 60s, this was the period where my father came.
In 1964, another archaeologist, Piotrovsky's father, Boris, was made director of the Hermitage. It was a hub for academic study, but due to the Cold War, virtually no tourists came. and there was little money to keep the museum running. Professor Mikhail Piotrowski succeeded his father, becoming director in 1992.
I have grown up in Hermitage, so I think it's very natural that when Hermitage needed some special treatment, a person who was grown up in Hermitage but wasn't working in Hermitage was somehow chosen.
Russia's perestroika saw the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. Leningrad was renamed St. Petersburg, but the new Russia had no money for art.
So we learned from our colleagues in Europe and America who live in the jungle of market economy how you do behave in this situation. So we managed to count the money, we managed to work with small amounts of money for construction and for acquisition. We managed to bring together friends of Hermitage to get money from the government. And when you walk through the museum, you see all the small challenges which are as important as the big ones.
These days, Piotrowski's role as museum director is as much political as it is cultural.
Putin as a ruler, it's very much in Russian tradition, and he has made a lot of important decisions in helping development of the museum. He is a cultural person who has a right feeling of Hermitage. He was the first who began not only to send his guests to Hermitage, he began to come with his guests to Hermitage. For us, for Russia, it's a rare thing. I think it's also rare for other countries, let's say.
Nowadays, Hermitage art travels widely. 70 paintings were lent to Houghton Hall in England to recreate Sir Robert Walpole's art collection, bought by Catherine the Great.
All you see here is of the time, so nothing has changed. Everything has been returned to its original position. So on either side, sort of in prime position, you have those two very great portraits by Van Dyck, which are in the Hermitage. And those are among the best portraits by Van Dyck in any museum. So what we have tried to do here is to recreate the collection as it was. In other words, to rehang the pictures, how the pictures were displayed in the 18th century.
It's once-in-a-lifetime exhibition, and certainly as a legacy for the house. And I think for our two countries' relationship, I think is very, after all, the arts is a way of bridging, of making bridges between countries, and you couldn't get a better example of that, and at this time, than this exhibition.
Came to enter the Hermitage in there. Piotrowski has been a globetrotter, sort of exploring the collections of the world. He's taken the museum from one century to the next, from one world to the next as well. It's quite a difficult transition from Soviet times to contemporary times.
Anthony Gormley's exhibition brought a new direction for the Hermitage.
What is important for us is to show that museum is a vivid organism, that it's not an old dusty archive, but is something that is living, and the contemporary sculptures as well as old sculptures are on the same level of art history. So by introducing some new works, we also point to the old works, and people who come to see something new, they rediscover the old ones.
Of the 27 works in the original Dionysus room, I retained 5. So all of them were taken off their plinths, placed directly on the ground, that basically allowed you to stand on the same level as the sculpted mythical figures of Venus, Athena, Eros, and others. And that was my concept for, in a way, rebooting the power of these ancient works.
The idea was that in one room we have only Greek sculptures, and in another room we have only Antony's work. And through the doorway it was a dialogue in between them.
It was a difficult project and like a shock when these iron, ugly from our point of view, stages have been on display on that gallery. But everybody was amused, everybody, because they were friendly. And we can see as visitor try to imitate the poses like this. like this, and so on.
Other contemporary artists are working in unseen places, like underneath the Winter Palace, where cats have traditionally lived since it was built 250 years ago.
I see the cats as a subculture.
Okay.
So they are my friends and they are my community and I talk with, you know. I will make a kind of installation with wood and carpet and also like you know, with this around the wood where the cats climb and stuff. So a kind of cat place, but then for humans.
Now in the 21st century, the Hermitage has expanded its galleries across the square into the General Staff Building, where paintings by Monet and Matisse stand alongside Malevich. An anthill of around 3 million visitors has replaced the royal court for which the palace was originally designed, and moving them around is today's architectural challenge.
There is a kind of experience of getting the masses through the former spaces of rulers. Therefore, it is inevitably not a kind of rare experience anymore, but a kind of common experience. And so we are trying to enrich the experience of being there.
All the objects that simply don't fit in the museum are in the storage facility. The entire contents of the Winter Palace are displayed here in over 1 kilometre of glass corridor. The beauty of the Hermitage is that it's a museum not about collecting or about selection, but about accumulation. It's not just about art, it's about identity.
I think the Hermitage is unique because you feel like you're visiting a place in which history really did change. This is a tectonic plate in the story of human culture.
And that makes it not just a gallery of art, but also the historical place, very important for Russian people.
By exploring the Hermitage, I've discovered why we collect and keep things, to learn about ourselves and our past. The Hermitage is a place of cultural history, palace and museum together. After war, revolution and austerity, the art has survived to tell the tale.
We go behind the counter on one of Britain's oldest family businesses. Hidden Histories is here on BBC4 tomorrow night at 8. Next tonight, though, our world movie premiere and historical drama from Denmark. Stay with us for A Royal Affair in just a moment.